Hey folks, this is an update. I'm talking about Diwali, the Festival of Light that takes place on the new moon in Libra, which will occur on Saturday, November 14th, as we see the chart here. Saturday, November 14th, we have the new moon in Libra. You see it's going to happen here around the end of Libra in Vishaka Nakshatra. It's quite a powerful celebration. It's a Hindu celebration called Diwali, or the Festival of Light. And, it's very interesting time to ponder why they have it at this time. Like all Indian festivals, they're timed to the sun, moon, and earth, the orbits of those three bodies, rather than just a calendar date, like a Gregorian calendar date, like, Christmas, December 25th. That just is based on the earth going around the sun. Well, Diwali and other holidays are based on the sun, moon, and earth coming together. So the new moon that happens at this time, which is usually in the month of Kartik, or Kartika, is called Diwali. And it's because the sun and moon join. It's not just wherever the sun is, or I'm sorry, wherever the earth is in its orbit around the sun, which is the zodiac sign, but also when the sun and moon come together as well. That's the beginning of the cycle, and that's when we do the celebration. And so Diwali is literally the celebration of light, and it's the Festival of Light, and it shows where we will bring, where we have to intentionally bring the light. So those of you who study yoga or study Hinduism or any of these Indian spiritual sciences know that, for example, we have phrases like namaste, which means that the light in me recognizes the light in you, or the consciousness in me bows to the consciousness in you. Diwali is literally where we bring the light out intentionally. And there's a very powerful astrological significance to this as well, which is what I'm going to talk about. It's not just, well, okay, this is the one we do it on. Again, when you don't understand the cosmology and the astrology behind it, cosmology is more of our relationship to the cosmos. That's what cosmology is, the sacred universe itself. Astrology is how we take the cosmology and then practice it and read it in specific moments. So the cosmology is actually universal. Cosmology is transcendent. It transcends culture. It transcends, the Indians and the Mayans and the Native Americans and the Egyptians. They all came to the same conclusions because they were tapped into the cosmology, again, which is that universal cosmic consciousness and that universal cosmic energy. They all interpreted it, or they interpreted things pretty much the same, but they used a different symbolic language and whatnot because of their culture, but they were all interpreting the cosmology. And so what that means is there's something more universal about astrology than just the nuts and bolts. Okay, the new moon in Kartik is Diwali, and then we just kind of, the full moon in Ashad is Guru Purnima. That's just a detail. When you want to really understand, Indian energetics better, you want to understand the cosmology behind the astrology, even when you want to understand yoga better, when you want to understand these stories better, then you study the cosmology. So the most prevailing story of Diwali is Lord Rama, who had his kingdom taken from him by the evil king Ravana. After this long struggle, returns to Ayodhya, which was the kingdom that he had been in exile from. And because it's very dark, and because the citizens are very eager for his triumphant return, they take light, they take lamps, and they light the path home. They take lamps, Deepa. It's also called Deepavali or Diwali, but they light his path home so that he could see his way home and return to the kingdom, return to the throne. So this is the prevailing energy of this new moon, is a return to spiritual, a spiritual righteousness. That's not the best word, or to return to our righteous place on the throne of spiritual truth. That's a better way to say it. Lord Rama was a king, and it's not just a king like we look at kings now, like presidents and politicians, because our times these things are mixed with a lot of corruption and we're very suspicious of figures like kings. But back in those days, Lord Rama as a king and Lord Krishna as a king, they were actually divine beings. And it's not just a worldly king, it's a spiritual king. It's the one who is the master of energies, the master of all of the indriyas, the master of all of the powers. That's who a king is. That's who you are as a king or a queen. You shouldn't look at these stories as being anything other than a symbol or an example of your power. Whenever you see kings and all that talked about, they're talking about your power, your glorious divine light. And that's the light that shines out from you without any shadow. It's the light without the shadow. That light of the sun, which is symbolized by the sun, that light of the sun, of the pure sun, once we incarnate here on earth, that pure sun mixes with the karma of the jiva, which is related to the moon. And this is where what's called Purusha, which is the pure sun, the Atman, or the pure self, mixes with the karma in the Prakriti, or the accumulated tendencies, or and this creates the duality of the mind, the masculine, the feminine, the duality, the light and the shadow, and all of the stuff that we're trying to navigate here on earth through the body with our karma in this world of duality, good and bad, da, 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 da. That's what we're grappling with. But on a pure level, your soul isn't grappling with all that. Your soul is pure. And it's that light without shadow that we want to keep in mind when we think about things like a king and the domain of the king. And so stories that refer to kings, especially, ones like Rama and Krishna, they're referring to that inextinguishable light that never dies, that's not corrupted by the shadows of the ego and of our confusion and our misunderstanding. They're talking about the pure light. Just like it says in the Bhagavad Gita, the sun cannot dry it, the rain cannot wet it. It's imperishable soul. So the story is symbolic on that level, and symbolic of the soul's triumphant return to its rightful place at the center of your life, at the center of your senses, of your mind, of your entire identity, rather than your identity being this ego, which is grappling with light and dark and shadow. No, your true self is beyond that. So the story of and what Diwali celebrates is, after this struggle and this triumph and this heroic struggle of righteousness, and it literally even having this act of treachery where the true light and the true wisdom was stolen, and this struggle and this exile away from the kingdom, we find our way back. We defeat the darkness, which Ravana the king represents. And Ravana the king stole Lord Rama's wife, tortured her, punished her. Everything that you cherish and love the most dearly, you can imagine being subjugated and, again, tormented, and what that would do, how much attachment you would have how much anger you would have, how much you would lose yourself in the struggle, trying to reclaim what you thought was lost. That's my wife. That's this again. Lord Rama and all the players in these dramas, yes, they're involved, but they're also detached. Rama and Sita are also, they understand that they're playing their role in the Leela, in the divine Leela, or the divine play of consciousness. That all of this that we see is just a divine play of consciousness. You know, it's a very poignant story now, as the world is so attached to politics and all of the stuff that can happen, and all the stories and all the Leelas and the Asuras, and, you know, the gods and the demons and the light and the dark and all of this stuff. We can very easily lose our equanimity. We can lose our equipoise, our yoga mind, which stays unperturbed by victories and losses, gains and defeats. Sometimes the demons win. Sometimes the gods win. They have to come back and fight for that righteousness again. So the story of the Ramayana is what it's called, brings in all kinds of different characters. Rama and Sita, who is the king and the queen, which are symbolized by the sun and the moon. They're both very marginalized in this story. The king is deposed. The queen is kidnapped and tortured and humiliated and all kinds of things. But then there's also the evil king, who is Ravana. Then there's also the real hero, the warrior that saves the kingdom. There's all these astrological correlations, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but you could understand very simply that the sun and the moon are Rama and Sita. Lord Rama is literally the Vishnu avatar related to the sun. In the Jyotish texts, all of the planets are also what are called Vishnu avatars, or emanations of the planets. Or the planets are emanations of deities. They're an embodiment of different deities, and Rama is the embodiment of the sun. Krishna is the embodiment of the moon, etc. But so Rama is literally the sun, and his wife Sita is the moon. So those two are symbolized astrologically in the Ramayana. They're literally the sun and the moon. Ravana is Saturn, the dark king. Saturn, who is the only one who can bring down the sun. So Ravana was strong enough to depose Rama for a while. And then Rama's great servant and hero of the Ramayana, who was called Hanuman, who was the monkey god. Hanuman is an incarnation of Mars, who was the general of the army of the monkeys. So it's a symbol of the monkey mind, having to concentrate and organize the monkey mind, instead of the mind just being literally like a bunch of monkeys running around. You have the one powerful monkey who was the general. Again, Mars is also the general of the monkeys, of the army of monkeys, who is heroic, courageous, like sort of Superman figure. He organized all those monkeys and brought them in service of the king, of the Lord. And again, this also shows the triumph of things like yoga and discipline, and not just being not being afraid to fight the good fight. So there's all kinds of astrological lessons when you study the Ramayana and the different, characters and the twists and turns. But when we look at, so something that's very powerful about this section of the sky, you'll notice that this is it happens in the sidereal Rashi of Libra. Of course, everything in Vedic astrology is based on the sidereal zodiac. All of the texts show that Ashwini and Aries are how the zodiac is defined. No questions. It's in every Vedic astrology text. And so when you do that, you set up the whole alignment. And so what you wind up seeing is, by the time you get to Libra, this Rashi over here, by the time you get to Libra Rashi, and we start hitting this new moon in Libra as being the time of Diwali, and you start to look at the nakshatras here, especially, it becomes very poignant when you look at the exaltation and the debilitation placements of the planets. This whole story of the sun and the moon both being weak and Saturn being very strong, it's very important. So in Libra, Saturn is exalted there. Saturn is exalted in the sign of Libra, which shows the power of Ravana, of the king Ravana, to even bring down the sun. Because again, this Diwali shows where, or this sign of Libra shows where Saturn is actually a very strong planet. The sun is debilitated in Libra, and the moon is debilitated in the next sign of Scorpio. So what winds up happening on Diwali, on this particular day, it's the day of the year where both the sun and the moon are probably the weakest, because the sun is in its debilitated sign and the moon is right next to its debilitated sign, but it's also completely dark, which is another source of strength for the moon. The moon is powerful when it's close to its exalted sign, which is Taurus, and when it's very bright. So when you take both of those factors and you say about as dark as it could be, or about as difficult as it could be, is when it's very close to Scorpio and when it's very dark. So on Diwali, both the sun and the moon are about as weak as they can be during the year. And Saturn is, as I say, Saturn is exalted in this sign. So it's the sign where the sun is inherently weak. So you're saying, well, why are we celebrating Diwali and this return of the light on this day when the sun is the weakest and the moon is the weakest? And again, when you look at the story of the Ramayana, Lord Rama and Sita are like tormented throughout the whole story. They're both being viciously mistreated and abused. But they persevere. And it's this idea that when the things are the lowest and things are at their lowest point, that's when you need to intentionally bring it. When the thing is really powerful, you don't need to bring it as much. In fact, you probably need to tone it down a little bit. But when things are at their lowest, the sun is at its lowest, the moon is at its darkest and most difficult, that's when we need to use our intention and our consciousness and our will to bring the light, because it's not naturally flowing so easily. Just like on a dark night. When the sun is out, you don't need to light a candle. When the sun goes down, if you want light, you need to produce the light and bring it. So this is how I've always seen this nature of Diwali is happening in this Rashi, in this zodiac sign, and with that story that's very clearly told. And how it really also refers to yoga, because Saturn, or Ravana, the evil king, is very powerful here. And especially the nakshatra where Saturn culminates. Saturn is at its highest exalted position at 20 degrees of Libra. And that last nakshatra, where he goes all the way to 20, that nakshatra is called Swati. And that nakshatra of Swati is ruled by the god Vayu, who was the father of Hanuman, the monkey god. So that place where Saturn is the most exalted is the nakshatra where that's related to Hanuman, who humbles Saturn. Just like in the Ramayana, he came and defeated Ravana, and Ravana actually got liberation in this as well. They were all playing out a drama. They were all playing out a Leela that started a long time ago when sage Narada tricked Vishnu. It's a whole kind of thing that goes on in the Srimad Bhagavatam. But the thing to understand about these Indian stories is they're all Leelas. They're stories, they're dramas that are playing on the field of consciousness. And these stories, these Leelas are there to make you remember that everything you're seeing is just a play of light and consciousness. It's all working out. It's all a story, a lila, that's there to bring up something in you. What is it bringing up in you? Is it bringing out more compassion, more stillness, more peace, more tolerance? Are you getting triggered by it? Are you getting triggered by those who are triggered? It's all a lila. It's a divine play. And through the agency, especially through the practices of yoga, of course, astrology, Ayurveda, and all sacred practices, we can keep our organism and our mind and consciousness balanced and not lose ourselves in the play of light and shadow. It's just like when you go to a movie and you watch the movie on the screen and we're so in the movie, and then they turn the projector on and the movie is over. We don't then forget that it was a movie. We remember it was a movie. But very much is the same in our life. The movie is happening on the screen of consciousness, and we've forgotten that it's just a play. That behind all of that is that which is untouched, that which has never been identified with the world. So when we have a celebration like Diwali, this new moon in Libra is where we have to be more intentional about that, because it's very easy to lose ourselves in the Leela right now. At this time, it's easiest to lose ourselves in the play of light and shadow. It's easy to feel lost and attached and stuck in the mind. One of the biggest lessons here in Libra, in general, one of the great spiritual lessons here is humility. Not humiliation, humility, being humbled. This is a big lesson, one of the biggest. Big lesson. Are we humiliated or are we humbled? We have a few pretty good examples of people who have been humbled lately, but their ego is so big that they can't be humbled before it. They can't be humbled, then be of service and do the right thing, even for themselves, instead of being able to be humbled and then come forth with greater humility and greater service as a result, because we've lost, for whatever reason. Instead of that capacity to be humbled, we're humiliated. And so in response to feeling humiliated, we have to find enemies and who to blame, because you humiliated me, I'm humiliated. It's a whole different energy than humbled. Humbled is a very different energy. If you've ever seen a picture of Lord Hanuman, Lord Hanuman is not, he's not arrogant. Hanuman is on one knee. Here's a good picture. I'm going to pull up a picture of Hanumanji here and show. We'll bring up a picture of Hanuman. I'll show. Hanuman, he's really the symbol, I think, one of the greatest symbols of the Libra energy, in the Ramayana, is, you see, he's the monkey god. You see, he's opening up his heart. In his heart is Rama and Sita. And you see he's kneeling. He's got the mace next to him. And he flies, he jumps and flies. He's humble. He's the humble servant of Lord Rama, the servant of God. And again, this is a symbol. This is a symbol of how your yogic practices and your life itself is meant to be an offering in service to your divine nature. In the highest sense, that's why you're here. You're not here to just have a good family and make money and be successful and be happy. Those are all parts of the story that you have to participate in, that you're a part of. That's your karma and the story that you're living, the Leela that you're living as part of your life. But behind the Leela, there's the point. What's the point of all that? What's the purpose? The purpose is to have the courage to be humble and serve that divine nature, to serve that divine within you, that cosmic sun. Because as I said at the beginning, underneath it all, you're the one without a second. Your true nature is not the interplay of karma and the effect of Purusha on Prakriti and all of that. That's not your true nature. That's the effect that karma has, the binding effect of your karma on your transcendent soul nature. And we're so attached to that at such a deep level because that's what's created our body and our mind and our false identity. Yoga is unwinding all of this stuff. And underneath it all, this story of the Ramayana and Hanuman and all of that is a story of yoga and the courage to not just fight, but to fight the good fight, to bring down the real enemy, which is our attachment and our ignorance. And so the Ramayana story is really one of the most amazing stories of course, devotion. You know, Sitaram, 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 these amazing mantras to Sitaram, which is the sun and the moon and the mother and the father and the heart and the will. And this new moon that we have in Libra is very much surrounding this story and this concept of being humbled because we feel like we're in a dark place. And that dark place can lead to, again, darkness and humiliation and defeat. We could feel defeated. What does that do, though? That's just one of the Leelas. We all lose. We win and lose here in the world. But there's really only one thing to win, and that's the truth. And that's the soul's liberation. And there's only one thing to lose, and that's the truth and the soul's liberation. There's only one battle going on, really. And if we're attached to the wrong outcome and the wrong self, then we're going to feel humiliated, not feel humbled. If you found yourself feeling quite sentimental and whimsical and nostalgic lately, I know I have, and feeling that sensitivity within, this is why there's a great there's a great humbling that's happening right now in many different areas of life. We're all being humbled and we're all being challenged to develop greater humility, and not humiliate each other, not humiliate those who have lost, not lose our humanity and our true self in those temporary wins and losses of the world, but instead to be gracious in victory and humble in defeat. It's not easy. That's on the external. On the internal, again, the whole symbol of intentionally bringing out the lamps and lighting the path back to the throne of self is a really powerful symbol to reflect on for the next couple of days, but also for the next month. We have this story of the Ramayana to really sort of reflect upon, to really think about how we get so attached to certain things. Then when they get taken away or threatened, we have to have the courage to both fight to get them back, but to also not lose our true nature in the fight. Again, when there's anger, then we've lost our, then it's not yoga anymore. It's not martial art. Martial art is done without anger. Now, there is righteous anger. There are times when we can, when we need to bring out the fire of anger, or at least that looks like anger, in order to beat back against wrong teachings or to protect others from adharmic or non-righteous teachings. That's a totally appropriate use of our power and of that power of Mars to destroy, and even to have a sort of divine vengeance. It's said that it's fine to act with vengeance in order to protect Dharma. That's the only time. If there's divine wrath, as you might call it, or whatever it might be, just because you want to settle a score of the ego or something, then that's a total misuse. But again, that kind of divine wrath, like Hanuman used against Ravana's army and whatnot, that doesn't incur any negative karma or any punishment, backlash. It's purifying, in fact, because then it's righteous anger and courage to protect others from abuse. But any other kind of anger, you might say, has a penalty. Again, a penalty just means that we feel the negative result of it. So instead, that fire of anger is meant to be used as the fire of discipline and strength and courage, mainly the courage to face ourselves, and again, not just lash out at those who we think have humiliated us, and instead be humbled. So this is even what happens when people have the sun in Libra in the natal chart or something like that. It can be very humbling for them. They could feel quite humbled, but they could also get humiliated easily. And if other negative qualities, negative tendencies are there, it can also lead to that kind of fiery revenge, humiliation thing if they're not careful. So when the sun is in Libra, there's a tendency to feel humbled. There's a tendency to feel and to want to be of service. But there's also that feeling that if it's not appreciated, then I feel humiliated. And now I have to maybe even exact revenge, especially if Saturn, when you get Saturn interacting like with a debilitated sun or something like that in a natal chart, aspecting somewhere or something like that, it can bring that feeling of humiliation and then wanting to exact revenge or punishment or things like that. So when the sun is debilitated like it is now, there's always that side of it. And right now, Saturn is actually, he's been casting this aspect from Capricorn. It's pretty far away now, but especially when the sun first went into Libra, Saturn was aspecting it. So this new moon is happening. It's in Vishaka Nakshatra, and Vishaka is related to the gods Indra and Agni. Indra and Agni. Indra was literally like the king of the gods back in the Vedas. He was kind of like a Lord Rama figure. And Agni, who was the god of fire, who also, again, was a very powerful god from the Vedas. So this nakshatra of Vishaka is one of those pretty motivated, ambitious, righteous, crusading sections of the sky. So we're seeing a lot of these kinds of themes playing out right now, where there's a lot of challenges and possibilities and possibilities for advancement around these issues. Staying compassionate for each other, very important. Staying compassionate for the world, for those who have lost, for those who have won, being gracious in victory and humble in defeat. You know, as someone who's played a lot of sports, there's something really noble in defeat that doesn't really come. You can be gracious. You can be a gracious winner. And you can be a noble winner, but there's much more nobility often in defeat. There's nothing like a gracious winner and a noble loser or gracious loser, whatever you want. Our ego is going to suffer here on earth. In many ways, the Ramayana is maybe the greatest tale of suffering that we've ever heard of. One of them. All the suffering you could imagine. The Mahabharata has a lot of suffering too, but Ramayana is one of the most difficult stories. Suffering beyond imagine, and loss and terror. But underneath it all, there's redemption and humility and gratitude. And the Diwali, it's almost like a kind of dark night of the soul when the sun and the moon are coming together here at this place where both of them are at their weakest, at their lowest. The sun is weak. We're like, oh, I don't have any light. And the moon is like, I don't have any love or heart. It's so hard to come up with it. So Rama and Sita, after such an arduous struggle, as they're coming back into town, they see the lights alighting their path, because all of the villagers have come out to welcome them home, and they're so happy that the sun and the moon, that the king and the queen are coming back home. That they came out and they brought the lights out because they know of the trials and tribulations that they went through. So just think of that energy, that love and devotion and service to God. Underneath it all, the Ramayana is really this great tale of service and devotion. And Hanuman is the symbol of bhakti yoga, or the yoga of devotion. In action, not devotion as just some feeling. Oh, I'm so devoted to God. Okay, we all have a lot of words. It's the action, right? Hanuman, his whole life was in service of Rama through any action he could perform. And so it's in action, humility and being humble in action. Even though you're the strongest, Hanuman was like the great superhero. If he'd gotten a fight with Rama, he'd have probably beat him up. He was like the most powerful, but he only wanted to serve the Lord. That's all he did. So how much are you willing to suffer? What fire are you willing to walk through? Again, there's stories in the Ramayana of Sita being immolated in fire, his wife, Lord Rama's wife, Sita, being burned, and just horrible, terrible stories. But Hanuman was courageous and of service. So again, the nakshatra of Vishaka also has that quality of especially socially. It's a very social, very much about not necessarily politics, but about culture and about elevating relationships beyond just the personal towards something that's more universal. It's where Libra becomes Scorpio. So it's that nakshatra where Libra, the last 10 degrees of Libra becomes the first 3 degrees of Scorpio, where the moon is debilitated. So this is where the moon is in its debilitation point as well. It's the nakshatra where Saturn is exalted and the moon is debilitated. That's what Vishaka is. Literally, Saturn's exalted at the first degree and moon is debilitated at the last degree. So it's literally about kind of taking our relationships beyond just the Libra, compromising to that Scorpio kind of darker transformation, where we're trying to transform our personal relationships to something more ultimate. So these are big themes for the next couple weeks with this new moon in Libra. It's happening on Saturday. As you can see, this this chart here, 28, it's like this is for here in San Diego. It'll be happening around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. If I go forward a couple hours, the exact time, let's see. Yeah, like right here. Yeah, so this is about 8 o'clock. So, it could be in a Saturday night, if you're in the East Coast of the US or wherever you are. So it's really Saturday, maybe Saturday night. So on Saturday, we're going to be dealing with that new moon energy. Okay. And again, it's really a time to dial in these energies that you're feeling right now and try to both observe, the effect of the Leelas and of the dramas, especially, again, these are kings, politics and social stuff that we get stuck in the world right now. There's so much political, social stuff going on. We're all wondering, and so much going on where we've won or we've lost, or we know people this and we're that, and we're so like, it's very easy to take the story I just told about Lord Rama and the good king and the evil king and the one who has the power and you got to defeat him and all. Very easy to kind of take this story from whatever perspective you're looking at and say, yeah, makes sense right now. But we see that story very dramatically shown right now, and we're approaching it from one way or another. And so for myself, I'm definitely going to be much, I've been, feeling a lot of that kind of, a kind of newly awakened sensitivity and compassion for people that have lost or won or feel a certain way. And, I don't think any of us, most of us don't enjoy any of this. We want to see everybody happy. We want to see everyone united and feeling good and being at peace. And we don't want to see people that we know and we care about either upset or saying things that to us look crazy, or who, from whatever direction. We're all just like trying to find some place of beauty and love and harmony underneath it all. And it's still there. And the best we can do is what we can do, is to remember our true self, our true nature as spirit, to win graciously, to lose with humility, with consciousness, with understanding that God's plan is working out, even if we don't understand it, and to honor the kingdom within, because that's really the story of all of it, is that play of light and shadow is an external game. It's not an internal game. We're just the pure light. And not just we're the pure light, but all those that we see as well, who might be stuck in some kind of darkness to us, they're also just the pure light. And to honor that pure light within them. So I hope people have a good, next month or so. And I hope whatever you've been going through the last few days, last few weeks or so, things aren't so stressed. Right before we had this election, I made sure I did a prediction, but I also made sure to let people know that we have a lot of powerful energy right now, and it's going to continue through the end of November. Venus and Mercury are still exchanging here. There's a lot of cooperation, a lot of cooperative energy that's going on. Jupiter is in its own sign of Sagittarius. The spirit of cooperation and of intelligence is still very high. Saturn is in Capricorn, again, with a lot of awareness. So again, Venus is in a debilitated sign, but it's exchanging with Mercury. Then it's going to go into Libra a couple days after, you'll see here. And so we have, by the 17th, Venus is there for the next few weeks. So again, there's a lot of grace flowing right now, particularly through the end of November. And so it's a time to really, try to be gracious, try to be disciplined. Mars has also started to move forward. So Mars in Pisces brings a lot of that spiritual warriorship on a high level. And we have to try to, stay grounded and purposeful in what's real and not just totally lose ourselves in the external play of, getting lost in the film. It would be like thinking you're actually in the film. It's very hard not to, but it's not that hard. Once you start to develop a better meditation practice and all of that, it becomes a bit easier. So I see there's some comments here. Ruth Graham said, "Thank you for this analysis. You're welcome." Some other, comments. Darcy said, "Perfect symbol of service and humility. Thanks. You're welcome." So I appreciate everyone who wants to come and listen to me talk about these things. I do my best to try to stay up on things. And, I hope this can be of help to people. And so we'll leave it at that. You take care.